What is up, guys? Welcome back to Pat Outdoors. Today we're going to be working on another project. I actually just picked up another dirt bike. This is a 2006 Yamaha TTR-230. This thing is absolutely clapped out. So you can see all the plastics are super faded. Some are even broken. I don't even know what kind of hand guards these are. Super old school, doesn't even have a brace on there. So I'm not sure how protective that actually is. So these are definitely coming off. I'm gonna put some more protective ones on there. The grips are super worn out. As you can see, they're like disintegrating as you hold it. So those definitely have to come off ASAP. The seat is pretty faded, and surprisingly, it's not torn up, which is good. Overall, the bike came complete. I've got the side cover in the car. We'll put that back on once we figure out why this thing doesn't actually run at the moment. Apparently, it hasn't ran well or been ridden in over a year now. So that's what we're gonna focus on today, since that's the most important. So excited to put a bunch of parts on this thing, but the most important thing is to make sure that we can actually take this out and ride it. For the most part, it looks unmodified. It's got original exhaust and intake pieces on there. The front wheel is oddly super new. It doesn't even look like it's got a speck of dirt on there. Brand new 8-tracks or R-tracks tire on the front. The back is completely dry rotted, so we definitely have to swap out this rear tire. Rear brake seems to be tensioned correctly, same with the front. We're gonna do a mechanical check on everything once we get this thing running. The previous owner said that the last thing he did to this was install a new carburetor. And I mean, it doesn't look like he's lying. This looks oddly fresh. It's got some new lines on there. So we'll take a closer look at that. He said he was able to ride it a couple times with this carb before it just completely died. So I've got a suspicion something's going on with it. But the first thing I'm going to check on this thing is make sure that it has some compression. All right, so the battery is completely dead on this thing. So we're just going to use a jump box to power it up. Just using this jump box by Noco. See what this sounds like. Doesn't sound great, but it does sound like it has some compression. Let's go test out the compression. I'm going to take out the spark plug. That looks like a fresh spark plug. I prefer to use like NGK. I just think NGK makes pretty high quality plugs. That's why a lot of OEM manufacturers use them. I actually don't even know what brand this is, but it looks new, so we'll just test it out for now. It's gonna be using a compression tester, which comes with a couple different size adapters for different applications and a compression gauge. Just use the one that has the same exact thread pitch. Let's hook the jump box back on and see how much pressure we can get out of this thing. All right, cylinder pressure is looking like a little over 90 PSI. Let's try that again. Okay, so it's showing a little over 90 PSI, which isn't great. I think TTRs are supposed to be at least 120 PSI, 130 PSI, if I'm not mistaken. Comment below if you happen to know the factory spec. 90 is pretty low, but it should have at least been enough to turn the bike on. All right, while we're here, we should probably check if this thing has spark, since it's clearly got some compression. I'm gonna leave that here. got some spark. So the previous owner was actually claiming that this bike has super low compression, which is why it stopped running. But 90 PSI is pretty low, though it should have been enough for the bike to at least turn on. Now that we know that it has compression and it's got spark, I'm gonna check the fuel system. One thing I noticed right away is the petcock valve is extremely hard to turn, which makes me think it's gummed up or something on the inside. I'm gonna turn this off and check what's going on with the petcock. Actually, I'm gonna take this line off. That's pretty loose, actually. That's kind of odd that there's no fuel that came out of there. Shake the bike. Sounds like there's fuel sloshing around in the tank. Well, let's turn this back on. That's weird. It's completely dry, but there's clearly fuel in the tank because I can hear it sloshing around. Let's take this off. Even that's pretty loose. Well, that's not a good sign. It's like completely blocked by something. So that's a really bad sign that we can't even blow through this fuel hose. And I see this like really tar-like residue coming out from the bottom. I've got a feeling that this guy used like regular vacuum hose as a fuel line, which could have caused the fuel to disintegrate the inside of the hose and potentially ruin the carburetor that he just installed on there. If we look closely, there is like this really thick tar-like material that's on the inside. So there was no way this carb was getting the proper amount of fuel, and it could have actually ruined the petcock as well. If he's been using an improper material hose this whole time, and it's got this gunk on the inside of the carb and the petcock, I think I'm gonna start with replacing the petcock and the hose and attempting to salvage this carb. Just gonna be using some of this gum out carb cleaner to hopefully clean out this port of the carb, and I'm actually gonna let it sit there for a few minutes. You can already see some of that brown stuff coming out of there. Actually, you can see it on the tip. Kind of making a mess here. All right, I'm just gonna let this sit for a few minutes. So that is just a little bit that spilled out from this port. So that should give you guys an idea of what might be going on inside this carb, but it seems to be clear enough to at least have a path for the fuel to get in. But before we ruin this, I'm gonna take the tank off. I'm gonna fully drain it out and then replace the petcock, put some fresh fuel and replace the hose as well. Then hopefully this thing turns on. Luckily, I've got a spare replacement petcock valve and fuel hose laying around from my old TTR-230. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this video so far, do me a favor and hit that like button. And if you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn your bell notification on, because I've always got plenty of these type of projects going on. And if you are interested in checking out any of the products that we're using for today's project, I'll have everything linked in the description below. I think all the bolts are pretty much off on the tank and the seat. I think there's only one bolt left holding this tank. Yeah, I'm gonna drain out whatever the hell was left in here. Before I forget, I'm gonna reinstall the spark plug. Also don't want any dirt getting in the combustion chamber. Just had a little bit of fuel spill out from the top of the cap, and It's green, almost like coolant. I definitely don't want whatever is in this tank to be going into our motor. Wow, the filters are completely destroyed on this thing. Oh, that works now. Well, at least we know that the new petcock valve works perfectly. Here, your fuel should definitely not look like that. So a fresh tank of 91 octane. Yeah, it's definitely much better. Look at that nasty. It's gonna be a nice upgrade. Back to the drawing board. So we've already confirmed it's got enough compression, it's got spark, and it's got fuel going to the carb, but I've got a suspicion that the carb is just simply way too gunked up in the inside. And looking closely at it, this is just like a cheap $40 Amazon carb that the previous owner installed on there. So I'm not even gonna bother trying to rebuild that. We're just gonna upgrade it right off the bat and go from there. I'm also gonna replace this dead battery while we're at it so we can just stop hooking up a jump box to it whenever we're testing. Already turned off the petcock valve and set aside the fuel hose. Now let's go take this carb off. Take a closer look at it. Loosen the clamp for the air box. I'm gonna go to the other side to loosen the clamp for the manifold. That came off really easily. To get better access to the cables for the throttle, I'm gonna take the tank off since it's pretty quick. Now we have full access. Man, all this stuff's pretty much just loose. You know what, since the throttle is also busted, I may as well just upgrade that while we're here. Let's go measure this thing up and see how big of a carb we can go with this thing. Check out what's draining out of this carb. It's like all green. So we should probably try cleaning it first before we fully give up and just order another one. The truth. Oof. Yeah, that's a bunch of gum down there. There's nothing gonna pass through this jet. Not even close. Nope, we're just gonna upgrade it. Okay, so manifold side showing just under 35 millimeters. On the airbox side, showing about 44 millimeters for the outer diameter. All right, let's see what kind of carbs we can get around that size. 44 on the intake side and about 35 millimeter on the engine side. Let's take a look at what it looks like inside the inlet of the engine. It's actually very clean. Air filter side looks sketch. Just had a couple parts delivered. Let's go check out what's inside. So here's everything that we got so far. This is just a replacement 12 volt 4 amp hour battery from Waze, which is essentially the same exact size as the one we pulled out. I'm replacing the throttle since the one on the bike is completely busted, and this one came with a new throttle cable, which is just a single cable. We're gonna be replacing these two tired, crusty cables on the bike, and it also came with a fresh set of grips. And then this is the Nibby Racing 30 millimeter carburetor, which actually came with a couple different size jets with it, but I'm gonna start off by installing it with the standard jet it comes with. This is actually meant for a slightly larger engine. I think it's rated for 250 to 300 cc dirt bikes, but I didn't want to limit myself by restricting myself to a smaller throttle body in case I want to put out more power in the near future. Since the throttle cables go through in front of the frame and under the tank, I'm going to take the tank off to get more access. That's actually going to make it easier for us to install the new carb as well. Hopefully this fits well. The outlet or the manifold side should be a perfect fit. It's only 0.5 millimeter apart, but the inlet side is significantly bigger. So hopefully we're able to squeeze this onto the factory airbox. Okay, so it seems like it fits really well on the manifold side, though we have a small gap that we need to fill over here on the intake side. Thinking we may be able to make something up, like a coupler of some sort. Check that out. That's a really nice snug fit with the factory manifold. Now we just got to bridge this gap. I just want to get an initial test fit. I'm going to rotate this so we can install the throttle cable, rotate it back, tighten it in place, and hook up the fuel lines, put the tank back on, and hopefully the bike turns on. I guess the black disc goes at the bottom of the spring. Man, this battery's gonna be a perfect fit. Wow, that's a perfectly snug fit. That's awesome considering I think I got this battery for like 20 bucks. Came with new hardware as well. If you're interested in checking out any of the parts that we're using for today's project, I'll have everything linked in the description below. Let's see if it comes charged. Oh yeah, it definitely comes fully charged. I guess it's time to check if this bike will actually turn on. We're not gonna run it for too long though, since we don't have an air box connected to the carburetor. I just wanna test out and confirm that this bike will actually turn on with 92 PSI as a compression. Turn the choke on. Turned on. I'm glad we know that the engine's actually running. It seems like it's running on the richer side and the idle is set way too high. So we're gonna mess with the tuning of the carburetor once we have the coupler in, and we'll bring this bike out to my property since I'm not trying to piss everyone off in my neighborhood. For the meantime, we're just checking over the rest of the mechanical condition of the bike. I just checked out the air filter and it actually wasn't in bad condition. It wasn't even dirty really. It was just not positioned correctly on the frame. So we just repositioned it and it's seated correctly now. The air box is actually relatively clean. Just lubed up the chain a little bit. It's on the looser side for tension, but I just want to see how it rides first. I'm going to make a decision whether or not I want to tighten that. What I don't want is to have all my plastics falling off on the highway. So I'm going to work on resecuring the side plastics now, reinstall the seat. Just going to wait for that coupler to come in, and then hopefully we get to ride this bike. So I cut the lip off on the airbox intake hose just so we can slip a coupler over it. Now this is a 2-inch silicone 4-ply coupler. It's like actually an automotive grade one. If I were to do this again, I would probably do it with a 1 7/8. It's not a perfectly snug fit since this is 48 millimeters and this is 51 millimeter inner diameter. And it'll snug up in place with a clamp, but I'd prefer it to be super snug. So if you are gonna do this, do it with 1 7/8. So as you can see, I actually cut it at a slight angle, and that's on purpose since the intake hose is not gonna sit perfectly straight going into the carb. So this is why I have it positioned this way. So if you look closely, the right side opening is just slightly larger than the left side. And here's how that ended up looking like. I used the T-bolt clamp that came with the coupler, and it is very, very secure. They use this clamp and this coupler for turbocharged vehicle application. So it's gonna have no issue holding up in this scenario. Then I added a little bit of RTV all along the portion of the intake tube that slides into the coupler. And then I just sealed it tight just to make sure that we don't get any sort of debris in the inlet. So now we are technically done with the carb install, though we've definitely got some tuning to do with this thing. So I just looked over this little window. This is actually how you check the engine oil level, and it is certainly overfilled. So you can see when I have the bike standing straight up, it is way over the full line. The fluid level is supposed to be in between this and this, but it's pretty much in the middle when the kickstand is down, which means that the bike is leaning over, so that's an incorrect reading. So this bike is definitely overfilled with fluid, so we're gonna drain this and we're gonna be changing the oil while we're at it. The drain plug for this is a 19mm behind the shifter. Ooh, that is some really black oil. Check that out. Good news is the screen filter doesn't have any debris on it, so that's at least good. Look at that. I wonder when the last time that's been changed out. Next, I'm going to be replacing the oil filter, which is located behind this cap. Ooh. So you can see there is some debris in the filter. So I'm glad we're changing the oil, but hopefully that's not a sign of something else going on here. It's quite a bit of metal shavings going on over there. So you see the sparkly stuff. The oil filter I'm using is just by K&N. It's KN-143. I just couldn't get a hold of a factory Yamaha one locally. So I'm just gonna be using this for the meantime. All right, now let's go top it off with oil. The factory capacity of the TTR-230 is supposed to be 1.1 quart, which is a little over 1 liter. I'm gonna be using some Motul 7100 synthetic 10W40. What I like about these Motul bottles is it comes with a pretty much like a built-in funnel with it. If you are interested in checking out any of the items we're using for today's project, I have everything linked in the description below. Not a single drop spilled. Okay, let's take a look at the window. I'm gonna tilt the bike so it's standing straight up. Okay, it is currently a little over the middle, which is exactly where I want it because we haven't even started the bike yet. So a little bit of the fluid is gonna go in the filter, which should put it at the perfect spot. So I'm super happy that we got the TTR-230 up and running for less than $200. And it starts right up every time now, but I wouldn't consider it good enough to ride quite yet. So I decided to leave it with my buddy Justin since he has access to a dyno at work. So he can stick an air-fuel ratio probe in the exhaust and truly monitor the air-fuel mixtures throughout different RPMs and make adjustments to the carburetor as needed. He can also swap out the pilot jet and the main jet if needed as well, in case it's running too lean or too rich. Once we get the bike to a good, smooth running condition, then I can consider investing a little bit more in it so we can replace that worn out rear tire, maybe replace some of the broken plastics, install new decals, and make it look a little bit nicer before we take it out. But if you enjoyed today's video, do me a favor and hit that like button. If you like this kind of content, want to keep up with some of my projects, such as that TTR-230 or any of my other bikes, consider subscribing to this channel. But this is going to be it for today. Thank you for watching.